I am Denise, 42 years old, and until last Sunday, I thought I was building a legacy with a man who respected me. Instead, I was funding a circus for a clown and his entitled daughter. We were at our traditional family Sunday dinner. The table was full of food I paid for. My stepdaughter Chloe smirked, tossed her heavy car keys right at my chest, and told me to go heat up her mac and cheese, because serving people was what I was born to do anyway. I looked at my husband Marcus, expecting him to correct his 24-year-old daughter. Instead, he threw his head back and laughed loudly. He told me to just be a good maid and do what the girl asked. I did not yell. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out the heavy brass keys to our 5-bedroom home, and tossed them right into her bowl of gravy. "Good luck paying the mortgage completely alone now," I said. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if your family ever underestimated your worth. Growing up in Chicago, I learned respect is earned or taken by force. I built my luxury event planning empire from the ground up. I turned empty bank accounts into a huge business. To Marcus' family, I was just a girl who got lucky. They loved the lifestyle my money provided, but they despised the woman who provided it. The dining room was suffocating that evening. The smell of food mixed with thick tension. Marcus sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a table I had custom ordered from Italy, playing the role of the wealthy patriarch. Chloe sat to his right, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression, displaying the diamond tennis bracelet I bought her for her birthday. When Chloe threw those keys at me, the metal struck my collarbone hard. It was not just a physical disrespect, it was a profound declaration of how they viewed my place in this family. "Go warm it up, Denise," she snapped without looking up from her screen. "You are used to serving people, right? That is your whole career. Just be the maid today." The room fell dead silent. My cousins and Marcus' brother Kevin stopped eating. I waited for Marcus to intervene, to be the man and husband he pretended to be at church every Sunday. Instead, a deep booming laugh erupted from his chest. He wiped a tear from his eye and pointed a fork at me. "Come on now, Denise," he chuckled, taking another bite of cornbread. "The girl has a point. You are in the hospitality business. Hospitality starts at home. Go warm up her plate and stop making a big deal out of nothing." A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. For 5 years, I had swallowed their microaggressions. I paid the massive mortgage on this house, which Marcus kept in his name to protect his ego. I paid for his luxury car leases. I funded Chloe and her endless shopping sprees. I did it because I believed in family, and I thought my generosity would eventually buy their respect. I was wrong. Generosity to parasites only makes them greedier. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my silk dress. I picked up Chloe's keys and placed them by her plate. Then I reached into my designer handbag. I felt the cool metal of my own house keys, the ones I used to enter this fortress of disrespect every single day. I tossed them under the chandelier. They landed with a heavy splash right into her gravy, ruining her plate completely. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe shrieked, jumping up as the brown sauce splattered her white designer top. I looked directly at Marcus. My voice was dangerously calm. "I am done being the maid," I said. "And since I am resigning from my duties, I am also resigning from the payroll. You and your daughter can figure out how to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. I am leaving." Marcus slammed his hands on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. He stood up, puffing his chest out, trying to physically intimidate me. "You are not going anywhere," he yelled, his face turning red. "You do not get to throw tantrums in my house. My name is on the deed, Denise. This is my house. You step out that door and you are leaving everything behind. Do not try my patience, because you will lose." I smiled, a genuine wide smile that made Marcus falter for a split second. "Oh, I know your name is on the deed, Marcus," I replied softly. "But we both know whose money keeps the bank from taking it away." Before Marcus could lie, a high-pitched sigh echoed from the other end of the mahogany table. It was Sarah. Sarah was a petite blonde woman who had married Marcus' younger brother Kevin 3 years ago. From the moment she entered this family, she made it her personal mission to act as the supreme authority on class. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her expensive red wine, and gave me a look dripping with intense condescension. "Denise, please lower your voice," Sarah said, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "You are acting so hostile right now, and it is completely unnecessary. We are having a nice family dinner. Marcus is just trying to establish some boundaries in his own home. You really need to calm down before you do something you will regret." I turned my attention to her. The classic tactic. Provoke the black woman and then call her hostile when she stands up for herself. I kept my face entirely neutral. "I am perfectly calm, Sarah," I said. "I am just setting the record straight." Sarah took a sip of her wine and shook her head with a patronizing smile. "Well, setting the record straight does not mean throwing a tantrum like you are back in the projects," she said, her voice coated in fake sweetness. "Let us be honest here, Denise. You have done well for yourself, sure, but you came from nothing. You were on food stamps in Chicago before Marcus brought you into this family. He gave you a stable environment. He gave you a name with respect attached to it. You really should be a little more grateful instead of treating his daughter so poorly. We all know how hard it is for people from your background to adjust to high society standards, but you are tearing this family apart over macaroni and cheese." The audacity of her words hung in the air. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. Kevin looked down at his plate, suddenly finding his green beans fascinating. He never stood up to his wife. Marcus was smirking again, clearly thrilled that Sarah was doing his dirty work. Chloe was grinning from ear to ear, wiping the gravy off her shirt. They all actually believed Sarah was putting me in my place. They thought her pale skin and country club membership gave her the authority to rewrite my history. I looked at Sarah. I looked at her perfectly styled hair, her pristine white dress, and then I looked down at her feet, peeking out from under the table. She was wearing a pair of bright red Christian Louboutin heels. She had been bragging about those shoes all evening, claiming Kevin bought them for her anniversary trip to Paris. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing right behind Sarah. She stiffened, but kept her chin high, pretending not to be intimidated. "Grateful," I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue. "You think I should be grateful that Marcus allowed me the privilege of paying his bills? You think my background makes me blind to the realities of high society?" I leaned down close to her ear. My voice was loud enough for the entire room to hear every single syllable. "If we are talking about high society standards, Sarah, maybe we should talk about those shoes you have been flaunting all night," I said, pointing at her feet. "You told everyone Kevin spent $1,200 on them at the boutique downtown." Sarah pulled her feet back under her chair, her face flushing pink. "I do not know what you are talking about," she stammered. "Oh, I think you do," I replied, standing up straight. Anyone who actually buys luxury goods knows that Louboutin soles are a specific glossy Pantone red. Yours are a dull cherry plastic. And more importantly, the stitching on the inside of the left heel is fraying. A real luxury house does not use cheap synthetic thread. You bought those knockoffs on a sketchy website for $80, Sarah. I know this because my company caters the annual gala for the regional director of that brand, and I know what the real thing looks like. Kevin shot his head up and stared at his wife. "Sarah, what is she talking about?" he asked, his voice tight. "I gave you the money for those shoes last month. Where did the $1,200 go?" Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her smug expression completely vanished, replaced by sheer panic. She looked absolutely terrified as her perfectly crafted illusion shattered in front of her husband and the whole family. "Enough," Marcus roared, slamming his fists so hard the silverware jumped and clattered against the fine china. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "I will not have you disrespect my family in my house. You apologize to Chloe for ruining her dinner, and you apologize to Sarah right now. You have completely lost your mind, Denise. You think because you run some little party planning gig, you can talk down to us. You forget who put a roof over your head. You forget who gave you a life outside the slums." I did not flinch. I just stared at him, watching the veins bulge in his thick neck. You really love saying that, do you not? Marcus, I asked softly, keeping my posture perfectly straight. My house, my roof. You love pretending you are the king of this castle while I play the dutiful servant. I calmly unzipped the main compartment of my leather tote bag. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of crisp papers bound by a heavy rubber band. The top page had a massive red stamp glaring in bold, menacing letters. Notice of intent to foreclose. I tossed the heavy stack onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished wood, knocking over a salt shaker, and bumped right against his plate. "What is this garbage?" he demanded. But I saw his eyes dart to the red ink, and his arrogant bravado immediately begin to crack. "Read it," I suggested, crossing my arms. "It is a letter from the bank, Marcus. Your bank. The one that holds the massive mortgage you love bragging about to all your friends at the country club." Chloe leaned over her gravy-stained shirt, forgotten as she tried to read the upside-down document. "Dad, what does foreclosure mean?" she asked, her voice suddenly small and laced with genuine fear. Marcus snatched the papers up, his eyes frantically scanning the first page. "This is fake," he stammered, looking around the room as if searching for someone to agree with him. "This is some kind of sick joke, Denise. I pay the mortgage every single month. The money comes right out of my checking account. I see the deductions." "No, it does not." I corrected him, taking a slow, deliberate step closer. "You transfer money into a joint account every month. An account you never bothered to check because you are too busy managing your image. And every month for the last 5 years, I have had to secretly deposit an additional $4,000 of my own hard-earned money just to cover the actual cost of the mortgage. Your luxury car leases your custom suits, and your expensive golf club memberships drain your income dry before the month even starts. You have been completely broke for half a decade, Marcus. I am the one who quietly kept this roof over your head." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The air was sucked right out of the room. Even Sarah stopped hyperventilating about her exposed fake shoes to listen to the financial ruin unfolding at the head of the table. But 3 months ago, I decided I was absolutely done investing in a property where I was treated like the help. I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "So I stopped making my silent transfers. I let your pitiful partial deposits bounce. You are 3 months behind Marcus. The bank is taking the house." The room erupted into absolute chaos. Chloe started screaming hysterically, knocking her heavy wooden chair backward onto the floor. "Where am I supposed to live?" she shrieked, pulling at her perfectly styled hair. "I cannot be homeless. My friends will laugh at me." "Dad, do something!" Kevin was still standing over Sarah, his face dark with a mixture of betrayal and anger. "So not only are you buying fake shoes, but my own brother is going bankrupt," he yelled over the noise. "What kind of fake family is this?" Marcus' face went from bright red to a sickening shade of pale gray. The reality of his financial ruin was crashing down on him in real time, stripping away every ounce of his pride. He dropped the foreclosure papers, scattering them across the food, and lunged toward me. I stepped back quickly, but he rushed past me and positioned his large frame directly in front of the dining room door, physically blocking my only exit. "You are not leaving," he growled, his chest heaving as he glared down at me. "You are going to fix this right now, Denise. Pull out your phone. Open your banking app right now. You have hundreds of thousands sitting in your business accounts. Transfer the past due amount and save this house." I looked up at the man I had married, the man who just 10 minutes ago laughed a deep belly laugh when his spoiled daughter called me a maid. Now he was sweating, panicking, and trying to use physical intimidation to force me into saving his miserable, fraudulent life. "My business accounts are for my company, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Not for bailing out parasites who bite the hand that feeds them. Now move away from that door before I call the police." "You owe me," he screamed, spit flying from his lips, hitting my cheek. "You owe this family. We took you in. I gave you my respected name. Just transfer 30,000 from your little party planning gig, and we can forget this whole argument ever happened. I wiped the fleck of his spit from my cheek with the back of my hand. My expression did not change, but the temperature in my eyes dropped to absolute zero. You are standing in my way, Marcus, I said evenly. And if you do not step aside in the next 3 seconds, I will call the police and file an immediate restraining order for false imprisonment. Do not think for 1 second that I will hesitate to have you dragged out of your own foreclosed home in handcuffs. He hesitated. The rage in his eyes flickered as the reality of my threat sank in. He knew I had the lawyers on retainer to ruin him. Slowly his shoulders slumped, and he took a half-step back. I did not run. I walked past him with the slow, measured grace of a woman who held every single card in the deck. The heavy oak front door was completely unlocked. I pulled it open, letting the crisp evening air rush into the suffocating toxicity of that dining room. Behind me, the house instantly erupted into a war zone. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy family completely shattered the second my wallet closed. Kevin's voice cracked like a whip as he finally turned his anger entirely on his wife. "How much money did you waste on fake designer trash while my brother was going bankrupt?" Kevin yelled. "You told me you were helping him with his investments. What investments, Sarah?" Sarah began sobbing hysterically, her fake sweet voice replaced by a shrill panic. "It is not my fault," she screamed back, throwing her wine glass into the fireplace where it shattered loudly. "Marcus promised he had everything under control. He promised me the spa would get the funding." Then Chloe chimed in, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You are all completely useless," she shrieked, stomping her feet like a toddler. "I am going to have to move into a tiny apartment like a peasant. I am calling my mother. Dad, you better fix this right now, or I am never speaking to you again. Let them tear each other apart." I walked down the brick pathway, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. I approached the driveway where my custom matte black Range Rover Autobiography was parked. It was a vehicle that cost more than the down payment Marcus originally put on the house. A vehicle I bought in cash with money I earned from the very business they just spent the entire evening insulting. I pressed the key fob and the headlights flashed, illuminating the manicured lawn that would soon belong to the bank. I climbed into the plush leather driver's seat and shut the heavy door immediately, cutting off the sounds of the screaming match echoing from the open front door of the house. I gripped the steering wheel and let out a long, slow breath. For 5 years I had carried the dead weight of Marcus and his entitled family. I had funded their delusions of grandeur. Dropping them felt like taking off a heavy winter coat in the middle of summer. I reached out to press the push to start button when my phone suddenly vibrated violently in the center console. The caller ID flashed in bright letters on the dashboard digital screen. It was the VIP Fraud Protection Department of my primary bank. I frowned. My business and personal accounts were locked down with the highest security protocols available. I tapped the screen to answer the call, putting it on speaker so it echoed through the premium sound system. "Good evening, Ms. Denise." The polite but urgent voice of my private banker echoed through the car. "This is Robert from the Executive Fraud Division. I apologize for calling so late on a Sunday, but our automated system just flagged an extremely high-risk transaction that requires your immediate verbal authorization." "Go ahead, Robert," I said, my eyes narrowing as I stared through the windshield at the house. "What kind of transaction?" "We just received an emergency electronic application for a home equity line of credit," he explained. "The requested draw is for $200,000 against the property you currently reside in. The system flagged it because the property title recently triggered a pre-foreclosure alert in the national database." I sat frozen for a fraction of a second, processing the sheer audacity. A HELOC. Someone was trying to take out a massive loan against a house that was already 3 months in default. "Who initiated this application?" I asked, keeping my voice deadpan. "The application was submitted online just 10 minutes ago," Robert replied, his tone turning serious. "It used your social security number and bears an electronic signature in your exact name. However, the funds are being directed to an external account that does not match your business or personal profiles." It is a newly formed LLC, registered under the name Sarah Brooks. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. My white sister-in-law, who had just spent the entire evening mocking my background and claiming I should be grateful to be in their family, was actively trying to commit federal wire fraud using my identity. And Marcus, the man who just begged me for $30,000 to save his home, was absolutely the one who gave her my social security number to make it happen. They were trying to steal $200,000 under my name to fund her failing spa. "Decline the application, Robert," I said, a dark, genuine smile spreading across my face. "And freeze every single joint account connected to my husband immediately. Send the entire application file to my secure legal email. I'm going to need it for the FBI." The next morning, the air in my corporate headquarters smelled like fresh eucalyptus and roasted espresso. I stood in the center of the massive stainless steel kitchen holding a clipboard. "Listen up, everyone," I called out, projecting my voice over the clatter of pots and pans. "We have the Mayor Gala tonight. 500 guests paying $2,000 a plate. I want the Wagyu beef seared exactly to a medium rare and the truffles shaved paper thin at the tables, not in the back. Do not let those waiters out of the kitchen unless their uniforms are absolutely spotless. Let us move, people." My executive assistant, Maya, walked briskly toward me, dodging a sous chef carrying a tray of ice sculptures. She handed me my personal tablet with a grim expression. "You have 15 new voicemails from your husband," Maya said, keeping her voice low. "And my phone has been ringing off the hook with calls from your sister-in-law. I ignored them just like you asked." I took the tablet and tapped the screen to play the first message. Marcus' voice blasted through the small speaker, sounding raspy and unhinged. "You think you can just shut off my cards, Denise?" he yelled. "You think you can lock me out of the joint checking account? You are nothing but a gold digger who used my good name to get ahead. You better wire $50,000 into my personal account by noon today, or I am going to tell everyone the truth about you. I will ruin your little catering business. I will tell the whole world you abandoned your family." I hit delete. A gold digger. The irony was almost physically painful. He was currently living in a house facing foreclosure, driving a car on the verge of repossession, and begging for my money while calling me a gold digger. I handed the tablet back to Maya. "Keep saving the audio files," I told her. "Let him keep digging his own grave." But before Maya could walk away, her phone buzzed loudly. She looked down at her screen and her eyes widened. "Denise, you need to see this," she said, turning the screen toward me. Marcus had just posted a massive status update on social media. He tagged Kevin, Sarah, Chloe, and about 50 other family members. The post was a masterpiece of manipulation and lies. It read, "I am heartbroken to announce that after years of giving my wife everything, she has chosen money over family. She walked out on me and my daughter last night, taking all our joint savings with her. Please pray for us during this difficult time." Almost instantly, my personal phone started vibrating non-stop in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a flood of text messages pouring in from Marcus' side of the family. His Aunt Linda texted, "How could you steal from that poor man after he took you out of the hood?" His cousin Greg sent a message saying, "You are garbage for leaving Chloe homeless." The flying monkeys had been officially deployed. They were all too eager to believe the narrative of the angry black woman destroying the successful black man, even though none of them had ever bothered to check if he actually had a dime to his name. Maya looked at me with genuine concern. "Should I draft a public response?" she asked. "Should we have the public relations team issue a statement to protect your business reputation?" I shook my head and locked my phone screen. "Never argue with fools in public, Maya," I said calmly. "They will just drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. Open a new folder in my email. Title it Marcus Defamation and Harassment. Take screenshots of his post. Take screenshots of every single text message his family is sending me. Download all those voicemails. Send the entire package directly to my lead litigation attorney right now." I took a deep breath and looked around my bustling kitchen. My staff was working seamlessly, creating culinary masterpieces, that would net my company a massive profit by midnight. Marcus wanted to play games on the internet to stroke his bruised ego, but I was building a legally binding cage to lock him away permanently. Tell the legal team to prepare a cease and desist letter for the defamation, I instructed Maya. And remind the forensic accountant to trace every single penny Marcus spent over the last 5 years. If he wants to talk about stolen money on the internet, we are going to give him a massive federal investigation to post about next. They wanted a war, and I was ready. I turned my full attention back to the kitchen and smiled at my team. I turned to the kitchen, but the peace only lasted for another hour. Just as I was approving the final tasting menu, an alarm buzzed on Maya radio. She pressed her earpiece and whispered that there was a situation unfolding in the main lobby. Someone was screaming at the receptionists and refusing to leave. The shrill, entitled voice echoing down the marble hallway was unmistakable. I handed my clipboard to the head chef and walked out. The lobby of my corporate headquarters featured imported Italian marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. Right in the center of the lobby stood my stepdaughter, Chloe. She was wearing designer sunglasses indoors, holding a shopping bag and aggressively slamming her platinum credit card against the polished granite desk. "Do you know who my father is?" she screamed at my receptionist. "Run the card again. The machine is obviously broken. I need my allowance deposited immediately. I have a nail appointment and I am not leaving until this plastic works." I walked into the lobby and stood behind her. My security guards were already positioned nearby. The receptionist looked at me with sheer relief. I crossed my arms. "The machine is not broken, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the room. "The card is declined because the account is empty, and your father has zero authority in this building." Chloe whipped around, taking off her sunglasses. She glared at me, her face twisted into an ugly sneer. She looked around the lobby, noticing the staff watching the scene. She smiled, thinking she had the upper hand. She thought I would be terrified of a public scene and would quickly write her a check to protect my professional image. "You shut off my cards, Denise," she yelled. "I was just at the boutique and my card was declined in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? You need to wire my monthly allowance right now. Turn my accounts back on, or I am going to tell all your fancy clients how you steal money from your stepdaughter." I looked at her with absolute pity. I did not flinch or whisper to quiet her down. I stepped closer so she could see the lack of emotion in my eyes. "You do not have an allowance, Chloe," I explained, speaking to her as if she were a slow child. "Allowances are for children who do chores. You are a grown woman who leeches off an account I solely funded. I am not your mother and certainly not your ATM. You are trespassing in a private commercial building. I suggest you walk out those doors before you find out what real humiliation looks like." Chloe's face turned bright red. Her bluff had failed completely. She looked at the security guard stepping closer and realized she was actually going to be kicked out. The panic in her eyes quickly shifted to pure vindictive rage. "You are a cold, hateful woman," she screamed. "If I am not getting my money, then you are going to pay for ruining my day." Before the guards could grab her, Chloe spun around and lunged toward the center of the lobby. Resting on a custom glass pedestal was a massive, intricate floral arrangement. It was a centerpiece composed of rare imported orchids specifically designed for the Mayor Gala. Chloe grabbed the edge of the vase and shoved it. The massive arrangement crashed onto the marble floor. Water, dirt, and shattered crystal exploded everywhere. Rare orchids were crushed. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Chloe stood there panting, looking at the destruction with a smug grin on her face. "Get her out of my building right now," I ordered. The two security guards immediately grabbed Chloe by her arms. She started thrashing and screaming as they lifted her off her feet and dragged her toward the exit. They pushed her out onto the sidewalk, locking the glass doors behind her. Maya rushed over, looking in horror at the ruined centerpiece. "Denise, I am so sorry," she gasped. "That arrangement cost $5,000. We do not have time to get a replacement." I looked down at the shattered crystal. I did not lose my temper. "Call the florist and have them pull anything comparable from their emergency reserve," I told Maya, "and log into the secondary credit system. Marcus still has one emergency credit card active under my corporate umbrella. It has a $5,000 limit. Maya looked confused. You want me to freeze it now? She asked. No, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. I want you to charge exactly $5,000 to it for property damage. Max it out completely. Then freeze it. Chloe just bought herself some very expensive crushed flowers. By 2 in the afternoon, the kitchen was running flawlessly, but my executive assistant Maya knocked on my glass office door looking pale. She stepped inside and closed the door tightly behind her. Denise, we have a serious problem, she said, sitting in the chair across from my desk. 3 of our largest corporate accounts just called within 10 minutes of each other. They all want to suspend their upcoming holiday gala contracts pending a financial review of our company. I set my pen down. Which accounts? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Harrison Financial, Sterling Real Estate, and the Anderson Law Group. Maya read from her tablet. They cited rumors of bankruptcy. A slow realization washed over me. Those 3 CEOs all had one specific thing in common. They were all senior board members at the Oak Ridge Country Club, and their wives played tennis every Tuesday afternoon with my lovely sister-in-law Sarah. She was actively weaponizing her privilege. Before Maya could say another word, my private office line began to ring. Only a handful of people had that direct number. I looked at the caller ID and a sharp smile touched my lips. It was Sarah. Put those contracts on hold, Maya, I instructed. Do not argue with them. Just say we understand their concerns and we'll be in touch shortly. Maya nodded and quickly exited the office. I pressed the speaker button on my phone and leaned back in my leather chair. Hello, Sarah, I said, my voice smooth and unbothered. Well, hello there, Denise. Sarah replied, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness and undeniable triumph. I just wanted to call and check on you. I heard you had a little meltdown with Chloe in your lobby today. It sounds like you are really struggling to keep things together. I am doing perfectly fine, Sarah, I replied. Is there a reason you are calling my private business line? Oh, I just thought you might need some friendly advice, she said, a cruel laugh echoing through the speaker. You know, news travels incredibly fast in my social circles, Denise. People talk. The wives at the club were just so concerned when I told them about your little financial situation and how you abandoned your family. Nobody wants to hire a caterer who might go bankrupt before the event even happens. It is such a bad look for high society. She paused, waiting for me to explode. When I gave her nothing but silence, she pressed harder. You see, Denise, you might have a little bit of money, but you do not have class, and you certainly do not have connections. I do. I grew up in these circles. I have the ear of the most powerful people in this city. You cannot just walk away from my brother-in-law and cut off the family without severe consequences. We brought you into this refined world, and I can easily have you thrown right back out into the streets where you came from. I traced the edge of my mahogany desk, still smiling. And what exactly is your goal here, Sarah? I asked, feigning defeat. My goal is to help you see reason, she said, her voice dropping its sweet act and becoming cold and demanding. You are going to call the bank and authorize that home equity line of credit immediately. You are going to turn Marcus credit cards back on. And you are going to apologize to me and Chloe. If you do that, I might be able to convince my friends at the country club that your business is stable enough to keep their contracts. If you do not, I will make sure every single wealthy family in this city boycotts your company. She really thought she had me cornered. She thought her country club gossip was a weapon of mass destruction. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking blindly into a minefield of my creation. She just handed me a lawsuit. I appreciate the call, Sarah. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It is always good to know exactly where we stand. Just do the right thing, Denise, Sarah snapped, or you will lose everything. She hung up the phone abruptly. The phone line went completely dead. I sat in my quiet executive office looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. I was not angry. I was genuinely amused. What Sarah did not know was the closely guarded secret of the club operational budget. She did not know who actually owned the supply chain that kept her high society playground functioning. I picked up my phone and dialed my lead corporate lawyer. It was time to show her what real financial power looked like today. I told my lawyer to draft the interference documents immediately. Then I went to my private suite and changed into a tailored crimson suit that screamed absolute authority. I did not call the Oak Ridge Country Club Board of Directors to schedule an appointment. When you hold the keys to the kingdom, you do not knock. I drove my Range Rover straight to the club and handed my keys to the valet. The grand clubhouse was a monument to old money and exclusivity, with its towering white pillars and manicured green lawns. I walked past the mahogany reception desk, completely ignoring the protests of the front desk manager. I knew exactly where the executive board met every Tuesday afternoon. I pushed open the heavy double oak doors of the boardroom without knocking. Sitting around the long polished table were the three men who had just tried to freeze my business: Arthur Harrison, Richard Sterling, and Thomas Anderson. They stopped talking mid-sentence and stared at me. Thomas Anderson adjusted his tie and cleared his throat, looking incredibly smug. He leaned forward and said, "Denise, this is a closed session. If you are here to beg for your holiday contracts back, you are wasting your time. We do not do business with unstable vendors." I did not blink. I walked slowly to the head of the table and dropped a thick leather-bound portfolio right in front of him. "I am not here to beg, Thomas," I said, my voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "I am here to accept your cancellations. But I figured I should deliver the consequences of your decision in person." Arthur Harrison frowned and opened the portfolio. "What consequences?" he asked, scoffing. "You are just a caterer." I smiled a cold, sharp smile. "I am the CEO of a hospitality empire." Arthur Fee corrected him. "Did you three brilliant businessmen ever bother to check who actually owns the regional supply chain that services this entire country club network? Did you check who provides your imported Wagyu beef, your vintage champagne, your truffles, and the temporary staffing for every single one of your private events?" The color began to drain from their faces as they flipped through the documents. I watched their arrogant expressions crumble into pure panic. "My parent company owns the exclusive distribution rights for all your luxury vendors," I continued, pacing slowly behind their chairs. "If you cancel my corporate contracts based on the malicious gossip of a bored housewife, I will legally classify it as a breach of good faith, and I will immediately pull the entire supply chain for the Oak Ridge Country Club." The room was dead silent. I let the reality sink in. "You have your annual Winter Wonderland Gala in exactly 3 weeks," I reminded them. "Without my supply chain, you will be serving your wealthy members tap water and saltine crackers. Your entire board will be a laughingstock." Richard Sterling stood up, his hands visibly shaking. "Denise, let us not be hasty," he pleaded. "We were just given some very concerning information by a trusted member. Sarah Brooks assured my wife that you were bankrupt and facing federal foreclosure. Sarah Brooks is sleeping with her brother-in-law and trying to commit wire fraud using my identity," I said flatly. "And she is using your wives as pawns to interfere with my business. That is called tortious interference. You can either reinstate my corporate contracts with a 20% inconvenience fee, or you can explain to your members why Christmas is canceled this year." Thomas Anderson swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What do you want us to do, Denise?" he asked, his voice completely stripped of its earlier arrogance. I stopped pacing and placed both hands flat on the table, leaning in close. "I want Sarah Brooks removed," I demanded. "I want her membership revoked permanently right now. I want her escorted off this property before I even reach my car. Do we have a deal?" The three men scrambled over each other to agree loudly, promising that the paperwork would be filed immediately. I turned around and walked out of the boardroom, leaving them trembling in my wake. 10 minutes later, Sarah was standing on the 18th hole holding her custom golf club and bragging loudly to a group of wealthy women about how she had just destroyed my life. She was mid-swing when the general manager of the club drove up in a golf cart flanked by 2 large security guards. He stepped out and publicly announced that her membership was permanently revoked, effective immediately due to malicious conduct. The other women gasped and backed away from her as if she had a contagious disease. Sarah shrieked and demanded to speak to the board, but the security guard simply grabbed her golf bag and ordered her to walk to the parking lot. Her face was bright red with absolute humiliation as she was escorted off the pristine grass in front of everyone she had tried to impress. I drove straight back to my corporate headquarters and walked directly into the conference room. Waiting for me at the long glass table was David, my lead forensic accountant. David was a quiet, meticulous man who could find a single missing dollar in a stack of 10,000 financial records. Spread across the table were dozens of bank statements and property records. "Sit down, Denise," he said, adjusting his glasses as I closed the door. "We have a massive problem, and it is much worse than just a missed mortgage payment." I pulled out a leather chair and sat across from him. I told him about the emergency call from the bank fraud department on Sunday night regarding the home equity line of credit. I asked him if he had managed to secure the file before Marcus and his accomplices could attempt to cover their tracks. David pushed a thick blue folder toward me. I got the entire file, he confirmed, his voice absolutely deadpan. "Your husband Marcus applied for a $200,000 home equity line of credit against your primary residence. He submitted the electronic paperwork late Friday afternoon, hoping the funds would clear before the bank reopened on Monday morning. The only reason the system flagged his application was because the property had just officially entered the preliminary foreclosure registry." I opened the folder and stared at the top document. It was a digital copy of the loan agreement. Right there on the bottom line was my signature, or at least a very good digital forgery of my signature. "He forged my name," I said, running my index finger over the printed ink. "He actually committed federal bank fraud to squeeze the last drop of equity out of a house he was already losing." David nodded, tapping a yellow pencil against his notepad. "That is exactly what he did. But that is not the most disturbing part of this file, Denise. Usually when someone in severe financial distress takes out a desperate loan like this, they use the money to pay off their most immediate threats. They pay the past due mortgage balance. They pay off their repossessed vehicles. They try to keep their sinking ship afloat." I looked up at him. "But Marcus did not do that," I guessed. "No," David said, flipping to the third page of the document. "Look at the disbursement instructions. Marcus specifically requested that the approved $200,000 bypass his personal checking accounts completely. He signed an authorization form directing the bank to wire the entire lump sum directly into an external corporate account." I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the routing numbers and the receiving account details. The destination was a limited liability company called Serenity Wellness Holdings. I recognized that name. I murmured, my mind working quickly. That is the parent company for the luxury spa my sister-in-law Sarah opened last year. The one she is always bragging about at family dinners. The one she claims her husband Kevin funded. David pulled out another sheet of paper. This one was a corporate registry printout from the state database. I pulled the public records for that specific limited liability company, he explained. Sarah Brooks is listed as the sole proprietor and managing director. Kevin is nowhere on the paperwork. But guess who is listed as the primary financial guarantor? He pointed to a name printed near the bottom of the page. It was Marcus. I sat back in my chair, letting the sheer magnitude of the betrayal wash over me. Marcus was secretly acting as the financial backer for his brother's wife. He was literally willing to commit federal wire fraud, forge my signature, and risk prison, just to inject $200,000 into her failing business. He let his own house go into foreclosure to fund her lifestyle. Why would he do that? I asked the question, hanging heavily in the quiet room. Why would a man who is completely broke risk everything he has left for his sister-in-law? David looked at me with a sympathetic expression. "I am an accountant, Denise," he said softly. "I only track the money. But in my experience, when a married man is secretly funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into a hidden account owned by a woman who is not his wife, they are hiding a lot more than just bad finances." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The stolen money, the fake shoes, the desperate attempt to maintain their wealthy facade. the way Sarah fiercely defended him at the dinner table. Marcus and Sarah were not just in-laws helping each other out. They were deeply entangled in a reckless secret, and I was going to expose every single dirty detail. I did not waste a single second crying over my broken marriage. Tears are for women who do not know how to fight back. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Elias, a high-end private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage and asset tracking. I gave him Marcus and Sarah names and the routing numbers David had found. I told Elias I needed a complete breakdown of their lives over the last 3 years, and I needed it within 48 hours. I paid his exorbitant rush fee in cash. 2 days later, Elias walked into my executive office carrying a thick black briefcase. He locked the door behind him and closed the blinds. Elias was a man of very few words. He did not offer any sympathetic apologies. He simply opened his briefcase and laid 3 distinct folders on my desk. "We will start with the money," Elias said, pointing to the first folder. "Your husband does not just have a spending problem, Denise. He has a massive underground gambling addiction." I opened the folder. Inside were photographs of Marcus at illegal high-stakes poker tables in the basement of a warehouse downtown. There were photocopies of markers and "I owe us." "He owes a syndicate nearly $150,000, Elias explained, his voice flat. "These are not the kind of creditors who send strongly worded letters. They break legs. That is why he was so desperate to forge your signature on that home equity line of credit. He needed the cash to save his own life." "But the loan was sent to Sarah," I countered, staring at the photos. "If he owed violent people, why did he wire the forged funds into her luxury spa account?" Elias tapped the second folder. "Because Sarah is his money launderer. Her spa is practically bankrupt on paper, but she processes his gambling payouts as phantom services to clean the cash when he wins. And when he loses, she uses the spa business credit to keep his bookies at bay. They are financially codependent. But that is not all they are sharing." Elias pushed the third folder toward me. "I suggest you take a deep breath before opening that one," he warned. I flipped the cover open. My stomach completely dropped. Spread across my desk were dozens of high-resolution photographs. Marcus and Sarah entering a boutique hotel downtown. Marcus and Sarah kissing in the parking lot of a high-end restaurant. Receipts for romantic weekend getaways charged to his secret credit cards while he told me he was attending real estate seminars. "They have been having an affair for at least 2 years, Elias stated, watching my reaction carefully. "They usually meet on Tuesday afternoons, while your brother-in-law Kevin is tied up with his medical practice and you are running your catering empire. The arrogance is staggering. He is funding his mistress with money he steals from his wife." I stared at the photographs. The image of Sarah at the Sunday dinner table flashed in my mind. The way she had smirked over her wine glass. The way she had called me hostile and demanded I show gratitude to the man who was actively sleeping with her behind my back. They had sat at my custom dining table eating food I paid for while secretly laughing at me. Kevin had defended his wife against my accusations about her fake shoes, completely unaware that she was wearing them for his brother. The betrayal was no longer just about disrespect or financial greed. This was a highly coordinated, malicious, emotional treason. They had weaponized my wealth to fund their twisted double life. Marcus was not just a leech. He was a predator. And Sarah was not just a snob. She was a parasite feeding on my hard work to finance her delusion of grandeur. Any lingering trace of mercy I had left for Marcus instantly evaporated. I did not feel heartbreak. I felt a cold, calculated rage. I looked up at Elias. "Do they know you are tracking them?" I asked. "Not a clue," Elias replied, packing his briefcase. "They think they are the smartest people in the city." "Good," I said slowly, leaning back in my leather executive chair. "Let them keep thinking that. I want you to work directly with David and my legal team. We are not just going to report the bank fraud. We are going to orchestrate a complete financial blockade. I want the deed to his car. I want the debt to his bookies. I want to legally own every single thing keeping Marcus and Sarah afloat. Call all the corporate litigation lawyers. We are setting the traps today. Elias smirked, a rare break in his professional facade. You are building a trap, he observed. I am not just building a trap, Elias, I corrected him. I am building a financial guillotine, and I am going to let them pull the lever themselves. Sarah needed retail therapy desperately. After being publicly escorted off the Oak Ridge Country Club golf course by security, she was frantic to prove to the world that she still belonged to the upper echelon. So she did what any parasite with access to stolen money would do. She drove straight to the exclusive Hermes boutique downtown. She did not just want a simple silk scarf. She wanted a Birkin bag, a $30,000 status symbol to carry on her arm like a heavy shield against the humiliating gossip spreading through her social circles. She spent over an hour torturing the sales associate, demanding to see every exotic leather option they kept in the private back room. She paraded around the pristine, brightly lit showroom, sipping complimentary sparkling water, acting as if she owned the entire building. Finally, she settled on a matte black crocodile Birkin with gold hardware. It was the ultimate flex, designed specifically to soothe her severely bruised ego. She strutted up to the polished marble checkout counter with a highly arrogant smile. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out the heavy metal corporate card linked directly to Serenity Wellness Holdings. This was the exact account Marcus had desperately tried to flood with $200,000 of forged home equity funds. She dropped the metal card onto the glass counter with a loud, satisfying clack. The sales associate smiled politely and inserted the card into the payment terminal. Sarah was already looking at her reflection in the nearby mirror, imagining the jealous looks from her wealthy friends when she walked into her next charity luncheon. Then the payment machine beeped. It was not the pleasant chime of an approved luxury transaction. It was the sharp, harsh buzz of an absolute denial. The sales associate frowned slightly and tried the chip again. Another angry buzz. I am so sorry, Mrs. Brooks, the associate whispered, leaning in close so the other wealthy customers browsing nearby would not hear. It seems this card has been declined by the issuer. Sarah scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. That is entirely impossible, she snapped, her voice rising a pitch. Run it again. Your machine must be broken. There is well over $200,000 in that corporate account. The associate ran it a third time with the exact same embarrassing result. Sarah's face flushed a dark, patchy red. People across the boutique were starting to stare and whisper. She frantically dug into her leather purse and pulled out her personal gold credit card. Use this one, she demanded, her voice cracking slightly under the pressure. The associate swiped it. Declined. Sarah threw 2 more credit cards onto the marble counter. Both were instantly rejected by the banking system. The sheer humiliation washed over her in hot waves as the associate quietly pushed the luxurious black bag behind the counter. I am afraid we cannot complete the transaction today, Mrs. Brooks, the associate said, offering a pitiful, sympathetic smile that only made Sarah angrier. Sarah snatched her completely useless plastic cards and stormed out of the boutique, her face burning with absolute shame. She practically ran to her luxury SUV parked at the valet stand. The moment she slammed the heavy car door shut, she pulled out her phone and dialed the priority customer service line for her business bank. She tapped her manicured nails furiously against the leather steering wheel, waiting for the automated system to connect her. When a human representative finally answered, Sarah immediately started screaming about her declined cards. I am a premier corporate client, she yelled. Why is my business account denying a simple $30,000 transaction? The representative placed her on a brief hold. When he returned, his voice was entirely devoid of the usual customer service warmth. I apologize for the inconvenience, Mrs. Brooks, but your accounts have been completely frozen. Our federal compliance department received a suspicious activity report regarding massive irregularities and potential wire fraud linked to this specific limited liability company. All your personal and business assets are legally locked pending a full federal investigation. Sarah dropped her phone onto her lap, her mouth falling open in sheer, unadulterated terror. A suspicious activity report. Federal wire fraud. She grabbed the phone again with shaking hands and immediately dialed Marcus. The second he answered, she erupted into a screaming fit. "Marcus, what did you do?" she shrieked, hitting the steering wheel. "Every single card I own is declined. The bank just told me the spa accounts are frozen for suspected wire fraud. Did you mess up the forged loan application? You promised me the money was clean. You told me Denise was too stupid to ever notice the signature." While Sarah was having a complete mental breakdown in the parking lot of a luxury mall, I was sitting comfortably in my quiet executive office. I was looking at a live digital dashboard, specially created by my forensic accountant. The dashboard tracked every single ping on those frozen accounts. I watched the red decline notifications pop up from the Hermes boutique in real time. I took a slow sip of my hot green tea and smiled. They were finally feeling the invisible financial noose tightening around their necks. And they had absolutely no idea that I was the one holding the rope. While Sarah was losing her mind, Marcus was entirely oblivious. He sat in the exclusive cigar lounge of the Oak Ridge Country Club, sipping expensive scotch and laughing loudly with a group of real estate developers. He was wearing a tailored linen suit, acting like the king of the world. He had silenced his phone earlier because Sarah kept calling him in a panic. He thought his forged home equity loan was processing smoothly, and his biggest problem was waiting for the funds to clear. He was telling an exaggerated story about a fake investment deal when the heavy wooden doors of the lounge swung open. The valet manager walked in looking uncomfortable. He rushed over to Marcus. "Excuse me, Mr. Brooks?" the manager whispered nervously. "There is a situation in the front parking lot regarding your vehicle." Marcus frowned and waved his hand dismissively. "Just wash it and leave it parked up front," he said loudly, making sure the other men heard him. The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, you really need to come outside right now," he insisted. "They are towing your Mercedes." Marcus' face dropped. The other men in the lounge stared at him. Marcus forced a chuckle and stood up, adjusting his jacket. "It is probably just a ridiculous misunderstanding with the parking enforcement," he told his friends, trying to maintain his composed facade. "I will be right back, gentlemen." But the moment he walked out of the lounge, his fake smile vanished. He practically sprinted through the double-glass doors and out onto the pristine circular driveway. Right in front of the main entrance, surrounded by staring guests, was a massive industrial tow truck. The hydraulic lift was already engaged, hoisting the front tires of Marcus' beloved matte black Mercedes G-Wagon into the air. Two large men in heavy work boots were securing the thick steel chains around the axles. Marcus saw red. "What do you think you are doing?" he roared, sprinting down the front steps. "Drop my truck right now. Do you have any idea who I am?" One of the repo men barely looked up. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Brooks," he replied, tightening a strap. "You are a guy who has not made a car payment in 4 months. We have a legal repossession order. Step away from the vehicle before you get hurt." Marcus lunged forward, grabbing the man by the shoulder. "I said drop it," he screamed. "This is a massive mistake. My bank simply switched routing numbers. My wife is a millionaire. She runs a luxury corporation in this city. I will call her right now and she will wire you double whatever I owe. Just unhook the damn chains." The repo man shoved Marcus' hand away. "Listen, buddy, I do not care if your wife is the Queen of England," he said firmly. "We do not take payments on the street. We just secure the asset. You want your truck back? You call the lien holder and work it out with them." Marcus pulled out his phone, his hands shaking with rage and humiliation. "Fine," he yelled. "Who is the bank? Which branch issued this order? I'm going to have the branch manager fired by the end of the day. Give me the paperwork." The second repo man handed a folded piece of thick paper to Marcus, who snatched it aggressively. Marcus scanned the document, ready to yell out the name of his original auto lender. But his eyes locked onto the header, and his angry expression completely froze. "This makes no sense," Marcus muttered, the color draining from his face as he stared at the legal letterhead. This is not my bank. Who the hell is Apex Capital Holdings? The bearded repo man climbed into the driver's seat and rolled down the window. The original bank sold your debt, man, he called out over the engine. They wrote you off as a total loss. Apex Capital Holdings bought your entire auto loan at a severe discount 2 days ago. They are a private firm and they demanded an immediate daytime seizure. You want to yell at someone, call the number on that card. The heavy tow truck roared and Marcus stood frozen on the driveway as his prize status symbol was dragged away. The wealthy guests who had been watching the scene quickly turned away, whispering. Marcus looked down at the paper, completely bewildered. He had no idea that Apex Capital Holdings was a shadow corporation created entirely by my legal team. He did not know that he was not just broke. He was legally owned by the wife he had spent years treating like a maid. Marcus sprinted away from the country club driveway. He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed Sarah. She answered, sobbing hysterically about her frozen accounts and declined credit cards. Marcus told her to shut up and meet him at the bank downtown. He believed if he just went down there, he could force the manager to release the $200,000. 20 minutes later, Marcus and Sarah stormed into the First National Bank. They looked like an absolute mess. Marcus was sweating heavily through his expensive linen suit, and Sarah had mascara running down her flushed cheeks, but their entitlement and arrogance were completely intact. Marcus slammed his hands down on the main teller counter, demanding to see the branch manager immediately. He shouted that he was a priority client and that the bank was illegally withholding his business funds. The commotion caught the attention of everyone in the lobby. The branch manager walked out of his office. "Please lower your voice, Mr. Brooks," the manager said. "Your behavior is disrupting the branch." "I will scream exactly as loud as I want," Marcus yelled. "You froze my sister-in-law accounts, and you are holding up my home equity loan. I want my $200,000 wired into her account right this second, or I am suing this establishment." Sarah stood next to him, crossing her arms and nodding vigorously. "You people have no idea who you are dealing with," she sneered. "We are wealthy investors." The manager did not flinch. "I am well aware of who you are, Mr. Brooks," he said, keeping his voice steady. "And I am also aware that your loan application was flagged by our Federal Compliance Division. The application has been permanently denied. Furthermore, all associated accounts have been locked due to suspected wire fraud and forged signatures. We are legally required to hold these accounts until the federal authorities complete their investigation." Marcus turned pale. His chest heaved as he tried to process the word federal. Sarah let out a high-pitched gasp. Before either of them could formulate another lie, the glass door of the private VIP wealth management suite clicked open. I stepped out into the main lobby. I was wearing an emerald green suit holding a briefcase. My hair was perfectly styled and I radiated absolute calm. Marcus and Sarah whipped around. Their eyes widened in pure shock. Marcus' face quickly morphed from panic back to burning rage. "What are you doing here, Denise?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "Did you use your little business connections to mess up my loan?" Sarah chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate. "You are pathetic, Denise," she spat. "You came down here to beg the bank to save your failing catering company, and you decided to sabotage us while you were at it. You are just jealous because Marcus is trying to help me build a luxury brand." I walked slowly across the polished marble floor, stopping just a few feet away from them. I did not look angry. I looked at them the way a scientist looks at a specimen in a jar. "I am not here to beg for anything, Sarah," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. "And I certainly did not sabotage your loan. The bank caught your forgery scheme all on their own. I am actually here closing a very lucrative acquisition deal with the Corporate Wealth Division." Marcus scoffed, crossing his arms. "You are lying," he sneered. "You do not have the capital to buy anything." I slowly opened my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the exact same document the repo man had handed Marcus 30 minutes ago. "Tell me, Marcus," I said, locking eyes with him. "Did you enjoy watching your Mercedes get dragged away on a tow truck?" Marcus froze. He stared at the paper in my hand. "You see, Marcus," I continued, my voice echoing clearly, I did not just freeze your access to my money. When your auto loan defaulted, the bank sold it to a private collection firm. That firm is called Apex Capital Holdings. Sarah looked back and forth between us. What does that mean? She whispered. It means I own Apex Capital Holdings, I replied, turning my cold gaze to her. I bought his car debt. And right before I walked out of that VIP office, I also bought the defaulted mortgage note on the house. You thought you could steal my money to fund your pathetic affair. But now I am your official debt collector. I own your car, Marcus. I own your house. And by the end of this week, I am going to legally own every single thing you both value in this world. I turned on my heel and walked out of the bank, leaving Marcus and Sarah standing frozen on the polished marble floor. They looked completely destroyed, but my work was far from finished. While they were drowning in the reality of their federal crimes and financial ruin, Marcus' daughter Chloe was living in a complete delusion. She had absolutely no idea that her father was a fraud, or that her family was completely bankrupt. Chloe was busy planning the most important day of her spoiled life. Later that evening, Maya sent me a screen recording of Chloe's latest social media post. Chloe was standing on the grand balcony of a sprawling, breathtaking mansion. She was holding a massive diamond ring up to the camera and squealing with delight. She announced to her thousands of followers that she was officially engaged to Dr. Julian Vance, a prominent and incredibly wealthy orthopedic surgeon. But Chloe could not just celebrate her own milestone. She had to use the moment to take a public shot at me. I am so incredibly blessed to be marrying into true class, Chloe said to the camera, tossing her hair over her shoulder. It is amazing how much your life upgrades when you finally cut the toxic deadweight out of your family. Some people are just meant to be the help, and some people are meant to be royalty. Julian and I are hosting our massive engagement party right here at the Rosewood Estate next weekend. It is going to be the elite social event of the entire season. I watched the video twice. The Rosewood Estate was a legendary $5 million private property known for hosting celebrity weddings and elite corporate retreats. The rental fee alone was $40,000 for a single night, and that did not even include the mandatory luxury catering and security packages. Chloe had recklessly signed the venue contract earlier that afternoon, assuming her father would just swipe his magic credit card and make the invoice disappear like he always did. She had no idea his cards were currently sitting completely useless in his wallet. While Chloe was picking out imported floral arrangements, Marcus and Sarah were back at the foreclosed house having a massive panic attack. Elias, my private investigator, had discreetly bugged the main living areas of the house weeks ago. I sat in my office listening to the crisp audio of their desperation. Marcus was pacing the hardwood floor, breathing heavily. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, hyperventilating into a brown paper bag. They had just realized they had absolutely no way to pay for this extravagant engagement party. Their bank accounts were frozen by federal investigators, and I legally owned all their remaining assets. We have to cancel the party? Marcus muttered, his voice shaking with intense panic. I cannot even afford to buy basic groceries right now, Sarah. If the estate runs my credit, they will laugh in my face. We have to tell Chloe the truth right now. Are you out of your mind? Sarah shrieked, dropping the paper bag. If you tell Chloe the truth, the entire city will find out we are broke by tomorrow morning. Julian family is old money, Marcus. His father owns half the commercial real estate in the financial district. If they find out you are in default, they will force Julian to call off the wedding immediately. We will be absolute social pariahs. Then what exactly do you want me to do? Marcus yelled back. Rob another bank. Denise has completely boxed us in. We have nothing left to give them. There was a brief, heavy silence on the audio feed before Sarah spoke again. Her voice was suddenly chillingly calm. She had found a new angle. We do not cancel the party, Marcus, she said slowly, her tone dripping with sinister calculation. We use it. Julian father is always looking for new private investments. He trusts you because you have always played the part of the wealthy patriarch. If we dress up, show up to that mansion, and play the perfect hosts, we can pitch him a massive ground floor commercial real estate investment. Marcus stopped pacing, his heavy footsteps ceasing on the recording. You want me to scam my future son-in-law family? He asked, sounding hesitant but clearly intrigued. I want us to survive now, Sarah snapped viciously. If we can get Julian father to wire us $100,000 in seed money for a fake development project, we can use that cash to pay off your bookies and hire high-end criminal defense lawyers. We can disappear before the federal agents even finish their paperwork. It is our only way out, Marcus. We pretend we are rich for one final weekend. While Marcus and Sarah were busy plotting their desperate criminal scam, I was making a massive real estate transaction of my own. I had heard Chloe brag about booking the Rosewood estate for her extravagant engagement party. It was a beautiful property, but I knew exactly who owned it. The estate belonged to Eleanor Rosewood, an elderly widow who had been trying quietly to offload the massive maintenance costs of the property for the past 2 years. She was a woman who valued absolute discretion and fast cash. I called my lead real estate attorney and told him to set up a private meeting with Eleanor that very same afternoon. When I arrived at the estate, Eleanor was sitting on the grand terrace sipping tea, looking out over the perfectly manicured gardens. I did not waste her time with small talk or aggressive negotiations. I sat down across from her and placed a single folder on the wrought iron table. Inside was a verified proof of funds from my corporate accounts and a legally binding offer to purchase the entire Rosewood estate in pure cash. I offered her asking price without a single contingency on the condition that we close the sale in exactly 4 days through an anonymous blind trust. Eleanor looked at the numbers and then looked up at me with a raised eyebrow. A cash closing in 4 days is virtually unheard of, Denise, she said, her voice laced with surprise. You must really love this property to move with such aggressive speed. I smiled, taking a slow sip of the tea her staff had poured for me. I do love the property, Eleanor, I replied smoothly. But more importantly, I have a specific event scheduled here this weekend, and I want to make absolutely sure the hosting rights belong entirely to me. The sheer amount of cash on the table was impossible to refuse. By Thursday afternoon, the closing documents were officially signed and filed in the county records under a generic corporate trust name. The ink was completely dry. I was the new legal owner of the magnificent $5 million Rosewood estate. I owned the grand ballroom where Chloe planned to dance. I owned the terrace where Marcus planned to stand and scam Julian wealthy father. I owned the very ground they were about to walk on. They thought they were renting a luxury venue to play pretend for one last weekend, but they were actually walking straight into a private arena that I completely controlled. On Friday morning, I was sitting at my office desk reviewing the final catering logistics for the upcoming weekend when Maya walked in holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It had my name written on the front in elegant gold calligraphy. She placed it carefully on the center of my desk. It just arrived by special courier, Maya said, looking disgusted. It is an official invitation to the engagement party. I picked up the heavy cardstock and opened it. Inside was a lavishly printed invitation inviting me to celebrate the union of Chloe and Julian. But Chloe could not resist the urge to be incredibly petty. Attached to the formal card was a small handwritten sticky note. The note read, I thought you might want to see what a real wealthy family looks like, Denise. Feel free to stand in the back with the catering staff. Try not to ruin my special day. I read the note twice, and a genuine dark laugh escaped my lips. The absolute audacity of this girl was astounding. She was inviting the woman who paid for her entire existence to stand in the back of a room that I now legally owned. She wanted to humiliate me in front of the city elite. She wanted to show off her fake rich father and her fake rich aunt. Maya watched my face carefully. Are we going to shred it? She asked, reaching out for the envelope. Should I call the security team and have them block Marcus and his family from entering the estate on Saturday night? I pulled the envelope back and set it neatly on my desk. I looked up at Maya with a perfectly calm and chilling smile. No, Maya, I said softly. We are not going to block them from entering. We are going to let them walk right onto the main stage. I want you to officially RSVP yes to this invitation. Tell them I will absolutely be there to celebrate. Maya nodded slowly, sensing the dangerous shift in my tone. Understood, Denise. Is there anything else you need me to do? Yes, I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. Call the audiovisual team. Tell them to cancel all their weekend appointments and head straight to the Rosewood estate. I want them to set up the largest high-definition projector screens they have in the main ballroom. And tell them to wire the main microphone directly into my personal phone. Prepare the projectors, Maya. It is time to show this family what real entertainment looks like. Saturday evening arrived with a breathtaking sunset over the Rosewood estate. The long, sweeping driveway was lined with luxury vehicles. Valets in crisp white uniforms rushed back and forth, opening doors for the elite socialites of the city. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over 50 tables draped in imported silk. Waiters carried silver trays loaded with caviar and vintage champagne. It was a scene ripped straight from a magazine, and Marcus and Sarah were acting as if they had paid for every single penny of it. They stood near the grand entrance, greeting guests with wide, fake smiles. Marcus was wearing a rented tuxedo that was just a fraction too tight across his shoulders. Sarah wore a stunning silver sequined gown. She moved carefully, making sure no one noticed the rental tag she had to keep tucked inside the lining. They were completely broke, facing federal prison, but tonight they were playing the roles of billionaire hosts. Chloe floated through the crowd in a custom white silk dress, clutching the arm of her wealthy fiancé, Julian. She looked completely radiant, completely oblivious to the massive financial crater her father was standing in. Julian's parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, stood by the custom ice sculpture, looking mildly impressed by the sheer scale of the event. Richard was a man who practically owned the city financial district. He was exactly the target Marcus and Sarah needed for their desperate investment scam. Marcus walked over to Richard, laughing loudly and slapping the billionaire on the back as if they were old college friends. Sarah trailed right behind him, holding her champagne glass high, playing the perfect high society matriarch. She knew my catering company staff was working the event, so she made sure to speak loudly whenever a waiter walked past. "Attention, everyone!" Sarah called out, tapping her crystal glass with a silver spoon. The gentle clinking sound echoed through the massive ballroom, and the string quartet stopped playing. The wealthy guests turned their attention to Sarah, who smiled gracefully and stepped up onto the small riser near the ice sculpture. "I just want to take a moment to welcome you all to this magnificent estate," she began, her voice echoing clearly. "We are so incredibly thrilled to celebrate the union of Chloe and Julian. Family is the most important thing in the world to us. But as we all know, sometimes you have to prune the dead branches to let the beautiful flowers bloom. We recently had to make the difficult decision to cut some highly toxic elements out of our lives. People who only cared about money and lacked the class required to truly appreciate moments like this. So tonight we celebrate new beginnings and leaving the trash where it belongs." A smattering of polite applause rippled through the room. Chloe beamed at her aunt, completely loving the public insult directed at me. Marcus puffed his chest out, looking incredibly proud of his mistress. They raised their glasses and drank the expensive champagne that I had personally selected and paid for. As the guests went back to their conversations, Marcus leaned in close to Richard Vance. "Richard, I have a highly exclusive commercial real estate opportunity I want to discuss with you," Marcus whispered smoothly. "We are looking for a few silent partners to seed a massive development downtown. Just $100,000 initial buy-in." Richard looked intrigued and took a sip of his drink. "Let us talk numbers, Marcus," Richard replied. Sarah smiled triumphantly. Her desperate criminal scam was actually working. They were minutes away from securing the cash they needed to flee the city. Just as Marcus opened his mouth to pitch the fake investment, a young man in a crisp white catering uniform stepped directly between them. He was holding a silver tray with two thick sealed envelopes resting perfectly in the center. "Excuse me, sir," the caterer said, looking directly at Marcus. "I have a special delivery for the hosts." Marcus frowned, waving his hand dismissively. "We do not want any appetizers right now," he snapped. "Go serve the other guests." The young man did not move. He did not offer them food. Instead, he picked up the first envelope and pressed it firmly against Marcus' chest. Marcus reflexively grabbed it. Then the caterer handed the second envelope to Sarah, who took it with a look of utter confusion. "You have been formally served," the caterer said, his voice dropping its polite tone. The young man turned around and quickly disappeared into the crowded ballroom, leaving Marcus and Sarah standing completely frozen by the melting ice sculpture. Their perfect night was about to become a very public nightmare. Marcus grabbed Sarah by the elbow tightly and dragged her away from the ice sculpture, his fingers digging into her sequined dress. They pushed past a group of confused guests and practically ran down a long mahogany hallway until they found a heavy oak door marked "Private Staff Only." Marcus shoved the door open, pushed Sarah inside, and locked the deadbolt behind them. It was a small prep room filled with extra table linens and crystal glasses. "What are you doing?" Sarah hissed, pulling her arm away and rubbing her elbow. "You are making a scene. We were right in the middle of closing that investment with Richard. He was literally about to ask for the account numbers." Marcus did not answer her. He was staring down at the thick manila envelope in his shaking hands. The return address, printed in bold black ink, was from the United States District Court. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He ripped the top of the envelope off and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. Sarah watched his face turn a sickly shade of gray. She quickly tore open her own envelope and pulled out an identical stack of papers. "Federal Court." Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "This is a subpoena from the federal court. We have been indicted." Sarah's eyes scanned the front page of her document, and the blood completely drained from her face. "United States of America versus Sarah Brooks." She read aloud, her hands trembling violently. "Count 1 wire fraud. Count 2 bank fraud. Count 3 conspiracy to commit identity theft. They know Marcus. They know everything. The FBI is actually coming after us." "They are not coming after us," Marcus yelled, his panic instantly morphing into blind rage. "They are already here. We have 72 hours to surrender our passports and appear before a federal judge for arraignment. We are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Sarah. 20 years. Denise actually went to the FBI. She built an entire criminal case against us while we were sitting here drinking champagne." Sarah dropped her papers onto a stack of white tablecloths and started pacing the small room like a trapped animal. "I cannot go to prison," she gasped, hyperventilating. "I am not built for prison, Marcus. The country club women will destroy me. Kevin will divorce me and take every penny I have left. You promised me this was foolproof. You said your wife was too busy planning parties to notice a few forged signatures." "Do not try to put this all on me," Marcus snarled, stepping closer to her. "This was your brilliant idea. You were the one who convinced me to open that fraudulent LLC. You were the one whining that your stupid spa was going bankrupt. You wanted the $100,000 to buy your fake luxury bags and keep up appearances. I forged that signature for you. And you think the federal judge is going to care about that?" Sarah shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at his chest. "I am just a desperate business owner. You are the one who actually committed the forgery, Marcus. You are the one who stole your wife's identity. I will tell them you manipulated me. I will tell them you forced me to open that account to hide your illegal gambling debts. I will testify against you right now to save myself. I will throw you directly under the bus if it means I get probation." Marcus grabbed her wrist, his eyes wide with absolute fury. "You say one word to the feds, and I will give them every single text message on my phone," he threatened, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I will show them every receipt from our hotel rooms. I will show them the money trails proving you knowingly laundered my gambling cash through your spa. If I am going down for 20 years, Sarah, you are going right into the cell next to me. You are not walking away clean while I take the fall. We are tied together in this mess. Sarah ripped her arm away and burst into hysterical tears, sinking to the floor in her expensive gown. We are completely ruined, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. We have no money for lawyers. Your house is foreclosed. Your car is gone. We cannot even pay for the food these people are eating out there right now. What are we going to do, Marcus? We have to run. We have to get to an airport tonight. Marcus rubbed his face, leaving sweat streaks across his forehead. We cannot run, he muttered, staring blankly at the wall. They froze the accounts. I do not even have enough cash to buy a bus ticket, let alone a plane ticket out of the country. We are trapped. Denise set a perfect trap, and we walked right into it. We are going to have to walk back out there, smile at Chloe, and somehow beg Richard Vance to wire us that investment cash before Monday morning. It is our only shot at hiring a defense attorney. They were so consumed by their own panic and their vicious threats against each other that they completely failed to notice the slight shift in the shadows under the door. They were screaming in a room they thought was completely isolated, but they had absolutely no idea that someone had followed them down the hallway. Someone was standing perfectly still on the other side of the heavy oak door, listening to every single word of their confession. The heavy oak door suddenly swung open, hitting the wall with a loud bang that made both Marcus and Sarah jump out of their skin. Standing in the doorway was Chloe. Her custom white silk dress seemed to swallow her small, trembling frame. Her perfectly applied makeup was completely ruined by the tears streaming down her face. She was gripping the brass doorknob so tightly her knuckles were completely white. She had followed her father to ask him about the catering schedule, but instead she had stood in the quiet hallway and listened as her entire life was completely dismantled. She heard about the forged signatures. She heard about the frozen accounts. And worst of all, she heard the undeniable truth about her father sleeping with her aunt. Tell me you are joking, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling so violently it barely sounded human. Tell me this is some kind of sick, twisted prank, Dad. Tell me you are not going to federal prison. Marcus scrambled forward, holding his hands up in a desperate attempt to calm her down. Chloe, sweetie, it is a massive misunderstanding, he stammered, taking a step toward his daughter. Denise is just trying to scare us. I have lawyers handling it. Everything is going to be perfectly fine. We just need to go back out there and smile. Do not touch me, Chloe shrieked, slapping his hands away. Her voice echoed off the small walls of the prep room. You are completely broke. You lost our house to foreclosure. You let my stepmother walk away and take everything because you were too busy sleeping with Aunt Sarah and losing money to bookies. Julian family is going to find out. I am going to be a complete laughingstock. Sarah stood up, smoothing out her sequined gown, trying to regain some fraction of her usual arrogant authority. Chloe, you need to lower your voice immediately, Sarah commanded, her tone harsh and unsympathetic. Crying is not going to fix this. We are in a severe crisis, and we need to handle it like adults. If you want to keep your rich doctor fiancé, you will wipe your face and help us secure this investment from his father. Chloe turned her blazing eyes toward Sarah. You shut your mouth, you pathetic homewrecker. Chloe spat venom dripping from every syllable. You are the reason my dad is broke. You sucked him dry for your stupid fake luxury life. At least I still have my college trust fund. When Julian leaves me, I can access the $200,000 Grandpa left for me and start over far away from both of you criminals. The room went dead silent. Marcus froze completely. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet his daughter's furious gaze. Sarah let out a bitter, cruel laugh that sliced through the tension like a razor blade. Your trust fund, Sarah mocked, stepping closer to the devastated girl. You really think you have a trust fund left, Chloe? Why do you think your father owed those violent bookies so much money in the first place? He drained your little college account 2 years ago to cover his gambling losses and buy his precious Mercedes. Your grandfather money is completely gone. There is absolutely nothing left for you. Chloe stopped breathing. The muffled sound of the string quartet, playing a cheerful classical melody, drifted through the heavy oak door, creating a sickening contrast to the absolute nightmare unfolding inside the tiny room. Her eyes darted to her father. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking completely. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not steal my money." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut and let out a pathetic groan. "I was going to put it back, Chloe," he pleaded. "I had a sure bet. I just needed time to replace the funds before you turned 25. A raw, guttural scream ripped from Chloe's throat. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal completely broke her sanity. She lunged at her father, her manicured nails digging into the lapels of his rented tuxedo. "You stole my future!" she screamed hysterically, slapping his chest, hitting his shoulders, pushing him backward into the stack of table linens. "You ruined my life! I hate you! I wish you were dead!" Marcus grabbed her wrist, trying to restrain her without ripping her silk dress. "Chloe, stop it!" he grunted, struggling to hold her back. "If you make a scene right now, we lose everything. Julian will dump you the second he realizes you are a penniless fraud. We have a 5-tiered cake waiting out there. The photographer is waiting. We have to walk back into that ballroom smile for the cameras and get Richard to wire us that seed money. It is the only way any of us survive this night." Chloe collapsed against his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy family was completely shattered, turning into a toxic pile of lies and federal crimes. But Marcus was right. They were trapped in their own expensive lie. They had to go back out there and perform. Chloe wiped her face, leaving dark streaks of mascara on her cheeks. She took a shuddering breath and straightened her dress. "Fine," she whispered, her voice hollow and dead. "Let us go cut the stupid cake. But if we survive this, I am never speaking to either of you again." Marcus pushed open the heavy oak door and led his shattered family back into the grand hallway. By the time they reached the edge of the ballroom, they had slipped their fake wealthy masks back into place. Chloe plastered a rigid smile on her face and walked toward Julian, wrapping her arm through his as if her world had not just collapsed. Marcus adjusted his rented tuxedo jacket and headed directly toward Richard Vance, ready to execute the final desperate scam. Sarah followed closely, trying to ignore the federal subpoena burning a hole in her mind. The string quartet was playing a lively waltz. The 300 elite guests were laughing, completely unaware of the radioactive drama radiating from the hosts. Waiters wheeled out the massive engagement cake. Marcus caught Richard's eye and raised his champagne glass, preparing to speak. But Marcus never got the chance. At that exact moment, the massive mahogany double doors at the front entrance of the ballroom swung wide open, hitting the walls with a thunderous crash. The string quartet jumped in surprise, and the music screeched to a sudden, painful halt. 300 high society guests fell completely silent, turning their heads toward the entrance in unison. I stepped over the threshold, and the temperature in the room instantly dropped. I was not wearing the modest catering uniform Chloe had suggested in her petty invitation. I was wearing a custom-tailored crimson silk evening gown that swept across the polished marble floor. Diamonds glittered at my throat, catching the light. I did not look like a woman who had just been abandoned by her husband. I looked like a queen stepping into her newly conquered territory. Flanking me on my right was David, my lead forensic accountant, holding a thick leather briefcase. On my left stood 2 massive private security contractors, in crisp black suits, their earpieces curled tightly around their ears. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. You could hear a pin drop as I walked slowly down the center aisle. The crowd naturally parted for me, their eyes wide with shock. Marcus dropped his champagne glass. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 pieces, splashing expensive wine over his shoes. Chloe gripped Julian's arm so tightly, her knuckles turned white, her eyes fixed on me in absolute terror. But it was Sarah who completely shattered. The combination of the federal wire fraud indictment, the frozen bank accounts, the public humiliation, and now my grand entrance was simply too much for her fragile, arrogant mind to handle. Her carefully constructed facade violently snapped. "You!" she screamed, her shrill voice tearing through the quiet ballroom like a siren. Sarah pushed past Richard Vance, knocking a tray of caviar out of a waiter's hands. She charged down the center aisle, sprinting directly toward me. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She looked completely unhinged, her silver sequined gown catching the light as she ran. "You ruined my life!" Sarah shrieked, waving her arms frantically. "You absolute monster! You set us up! You stole my company! You called the federal agents on me! I am going to kill you!" The elite guests gasped, stumbling backward to get out of her way. Marcus yelled her name, lunging forward to stop her, but he was too slow. Sarah closed the distance, raising her hands to claw at my face. I did not even blink. I did not take a single step backward. Before Sarah could get within 3 feet of me, my two security contractors stepped smoothly in front of me, forming an impenetrable wall of solid muscle. Sarah crashed into them with a loud thud. The guard on the left grabbed her flailing right arm, while the guard on the right grabbed her left wrist. With one fluid, effortless motion, they twisted her arms behind her back and forced her straight down onto the polished marble floor. Sarah hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the wind completely out of her. Her expensive rented gown bunched up around her knees, and her blonde hair fell across her sweaty face. She struggled against the guards, kicking her legs and letting out wild, animalistic sobs, but they held her firmly against the cold stone floor, pinning her down in front of 300 horrified high society guests. Julian's wealthy parents stared at the scene in absolute disgust. Chloe buried her face in Julian's shoulder, crying hysterically. Marcus stood frozen in the center of the room, his jaw hanging open, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster. I stepped forward, looking down at my sister-in-law as she writhed helplessly on the floor. "I told you I was not a maid, Sarah," I said, my voice perfectly calm, carrying clearly across the silent, shocked room. "And you should really learn to behave when you are a guest in my house." I did not wait for Sarah to respond. I simply lifted the hem of my crimson gown and stepped directly over her struggling body, as if she were nothing more than a discarded piece of trash on the sidewalk. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, echoing in the absolute silence of the grand ballroom. The 300 elite guests parted for me like the Red Sea. I saw women whispering behind their hands, and men staring in stunned disbelief. I walked past Chloe, who was trembling uncontrollably, and past Julian, who looked completely bewildered by the chaotic scene. I approached the small riser near the melting ice sculpture, where Sarah had stood just moments before delivering her arrogant speech about pruning toxic elements from the family. I stepped up onto the riser, adjusting my posture until I stood perfectly tall. I reached out and tapped the silver microphone with my index finger. The sharp popping sound echoed through the massive room, snapping the crowd out of their trance. I smiled warmly at the sea of wealthy faces looking back at me. "Thank you all so much for coming to my house tonight," I said, my voice projecting clearly and smoothly over the speakers. "I truly hope you are enjoying the exquisite caviar and the vintage champagne. I personally selected the menu, and I hope you are enjoying the catering which my company provided." A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The guests looked around in absolute shock, exchanging confused glances. Richard Vance, the billionaire real estate tycoon who was just about to hand Marcus $100,000, stepped forward. His brow was heavily furrowed. "Your house?" Richard asked, his deep voice carrying over the murmurs. "Marcus told us he rented this estate for the evening." "Who exactly are you?" "I am Denise," I replied, my tone unwavering. "I am the woman Marcus has been legally married to for 5 years. The woman whose bank accounts he drained to fund his fake lifestyle. And as of Thursday afternoon, I am the sole legal owner of the Rosewood estate. So when Marcus and Sarah invited you all here tonight to celebrate new beginnings, they were actually trespassing on my private property." The murmurs erupted into a loud, chaotic buzz. The elite socialites realized they were caught in the middle of a massive scandal. Julian turned to Chloe, his face pale. "Is she telling the truth?" Julian demanded, his voice tight with anger. "Is your family broke?" Chloe burst into fresh tears, unable to speak, hiding her face in her hands. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The illusion he had spent years building was burning to the ground in front of the most powerful people in the city. His face contorted into a mask of pure desperation. "Shut up!" he roared, launching himself toward the riser. "Shut her microphone off right now." He tried to rush the stage, but my security contractor stepped smoothly into his path, shoving him backward with a heavy hand against his chest. Marcus stumbled, his rented tuxedo jacket ripping at the seam. Realizing he could not get past the wall of muscle, Marcus frantically looked around for another way to silence me. He spotted the audio-visual control table set up near the side wall of the ballroom. He scrambled toward it, pushing a waiter out of the way. He grabbed the thick black cables connecting the microphone to the main soundboard and yanked them violently. The microphone in my hand let out a sharp squeal of feedback before going completely dead. Marcus stood panting, holding the severed cords in his hands, a wild, triumphant look in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought cutting the audio would stop me from exposing the rest of his pathetic lies to his wealthy targets. "You are done, Denise!" he yelled across the room, his voice echoing without the need for a microphone. "I am not letting you ruin my daughter's engagement. Get out of here before I call the police and have you arrested for ruining a private event." I looked down at the dead microphone in my hand, and then looked back up at Marcus. I did not look angry or defeated. I just offered him a slow, chilling smile. I tossed the useless microphone onto the floor. I did not need it anymore, because at that exact moment, a loud mechanical hum vibrated through the ballroom. Everyone turned their attention toward the back of the stage. Dropping slowly from the high vaulted ceiling was a massive high-definition projector screen. The room lights automatically dimmed, plunging the ballroom into a dramatic cinematic shadow. Marcus dropped the severed cables, his eyes widening in sheer terror as the heavy projector mounted above the balcony flickered to life. The beam of bright white light cut through the darkness, hitting the massive screen with pinpoint accuracy. The show was just beginning. The bright white beam from the projector hit the massive screen above the stage. The first image faded into sharp, high-definition focus. It was a scanned copy of the home equity line of credit application. My digital signature was highlighted in bright red ink right next to the signature belonging to Marcus. I stood perfectly still, letting the crowd read the bold letters at the top of the page. $200,000. I pointed up at the screen, my voice carrying easily across the silent room without the microphone. "That is a federal bank loan Marcus applied for last Friday," I announced. "He submitted it using my social security number and forged my digital signature because he has not made a mortgage payment in months. My house, the house he claimed to own, is currently in active foreclosure." A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the wealthy crowd. Richard Vance, the billionaire who had almost handed Marcus a massive check, stepped backward, completely appalled. Julian dropped Chloe's arm as if she had suddenly caught fire. But I was not finished. I raised my hand and the slide instantly changed. Now the screen displayed a pristine bank wire transfer receipt. The routing numbers were enlarged for everyone to see. As you can see, I continued, the forged funds were not used to save his house. Marcus directed the bank to wire the entire $200,000 to an external corporate account registered to Serenity Wellness Holdings. That limited liability company is solely owned and operated by his sister-in-law, Sarah Brooks. They conspired to commit federal wire fraud to fund her failing luxury spa. Several people actually covered their mouths in horror. The elite women who had played tennis with Sarah at the Oak Ridge Country Club began whispering furiously among themselves. Sarah was still pinned to the cold marble floor by my security team, but she turned her face away, sobbing hysterically, as her financial crimes were broadcast to the entire city. Marcus was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he frantically tried to wave his hands at the crowd. "It is a lie," he shouted desperately. "She altered the documents. Do not look at the screen. She is just a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin us. I laughed, a cold, echoing sound that cut right through his pathetic lies. Jealous, I repeated, shaking my head. Marcus, you really think highly of yourself. Let us show everyone exactly what I am supposedly jealous of. I raised my hand one last time. The screen flickered, and the financial documents disappeared. In their place, a series of bright green text message bubbles filled the massive display. They were high-resolution screenshots taken directly from Marcus' personal phone. The timestamps showed they were sent on Tuesday afternoons over the past 2 years. The first message was from Marcus. It read, "Kevin is at the clinic all day. I booked the suite at the Grand Hotel. Wear those red shoes I like." The reply from Sarah appeared right beneath it. It read, "I am already in the lobby. Do not forget to transfer the cash to the spa account so Kevin does not get suspicious about the room charge. I cannot wait to see you." The absolute silence in the ballroom shattered into a million pieces. The collective gasp from 300 people was deafening. Women shrieked in genuine shock. Men yelled out in disbelief. The financial fraud was shocking, but the undeniable proof of a long-term twisted affair between a man and his brother-wife was an absolute social nuclear bomb. It was the ultimate betrayal displayed in 50-foot letters for the entire world to read. Dozens of glowing smartphone screens popped up from the crowd. The elite guests, who usually prided themselves on their refined manners, were eagerly recording the screen and snapping photos of Marcus standing in the middle of the room. The flash photography illuminated his terrified face over and over. They captured every single piece of evidence to send to their group chats and gossip blogs. The fake perfect family was being digitally executed in real time. Richard Vance grabbed his wife's arm, pulling her away. His face was twisted in disgust. "Get our coats, Eleanor," Richard commanded, his voice booming with authority. "We are leaving right now. I will not have our family name associated with these filthy criminals." Julian looked completely sick to his stomach. He stared at the giant screen, reading the explicit text messages between his future father-in-law and aunt-in-law. Chloe reached out for him, crying hysterically and begging him to listen to her. Julian violently pulled his arm away from her grasp, looking at her as if she were a complete stranger. Julian violently pulled his arm away from her grasp, looking at her as if she were a complete stranger. But Julian was not the only man in the room whose entire reality had just been violently shattered. Standing near the edge of the dance floor was Kevin. He had been perfectly still since the first financial document appeared on the screen. He had watched the crowd react to his wife committing federal fraud. But when the text messages flashed across the 50-foot display detailing the secret hotel rooms and the stolen money, something inside Kevin completely snapped. Kevin was a respected doctor, a man who spent his life healing people and building a quiet, comfortable life for his wife. He had defended Sarah at that Sunday dinner. He had bought her the expensive shoes she demanded. And now he was staring at digital proof that she had been sleeping with his own brother on his work days. Kevin pushed his way through the crowd of horrified socialites. He did not say a word as he marched across the marble floor. His hands were curled into tight fists, and his face was completely drained of blood. Marcus saw him coming, and his eyes widened in sheer panic. Marcus raised his hands, palms facing outward, trying to walk backward. "Kevin, wait!" Marcus pleaded, his voice trembling. "Do not believe what you see on that screen. It is completely out of context. She set us up. We were just doing business together." "Business?" Kevin repeated, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "You were doing business with my wife in a hotel suite while I was at the clinic. My own flesh and blood." Marcus opened his mouth to spin another pathetic lie, but Kevin did not give him the chance. Kevin lunged forward with explosive speed. He threw a massive right hook that connected squarely with Marcus' jaw. The loud, sickening crack echoed over the murmurs of the crowd. Marcus' head snapped violently to the side, and he stumbled backward, dazed and bleeding from his split lip. The elite guests screamed and scattered, pulling their expensive gowns out of the way to avoid the brawl. Kevin did not stop. Years of quiet resentment and the ultimate betrayal fueled his rage. He grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his rented tuxedo and shoved him hard. Marcus tried to gain his footing on the slippery marble floor, but his dress shoes lost traction. He fell backward, arms flailing wildly in the air. He crashed directly into the grand dessert table. Resting in the center of the table was Chloe, magnificent five-tier engagement cake. It was a towering masterpiece of white vanilla fondant gold leaf accents and sugar flowers that cost more than most people made in a month. Marcus' heavy frame slammed into the edge of the table, flipping the entire structure upward. The massive cake launched into the air and came crashing down directly on top of Marcus. Layers of dense sponge cake, thick buttercream frosting, and heavy wooden support dowels collapsed over his head and chest. The wooden table shattered under his weight, sending crystal plates and silver forks clattering across the floor. Marcus groaned, rolling over in the wreckage, his rented tuxedo completely destroyed and covered in white frosting and gold flakes. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. The pristine white silk of her custom dress was splattered with flying buttercream. Her perfect aesthetic, her elite party, her entire social standing were entirely obliterated. She fell to her knees in the cake debris, sobbing hysterically, picking up a smashed sugar flower with shaking hands. Her father was bleeding in a pile of ruined dessert, and her aunt was pinned to the floor by private security. Amidst the absolute chaos, Julian remained perfectly still. The young wealthy surgeon did not yell or panic. He simply adjusted his tailored suit jacket and stepped carefully over the mess of frosting and broken crystal. He walked purposefully toward the front of the room, leaving Chloe weeping on the floor behind him. Julian stepped up onto the riser where I was standing. He looked at me, giving a short, respectful nod, acknowledging the absolute masterclass in exposure I had just delivered. Then he leaned down and picked up the microphone Marcus had dropped. He looked over at the audio-visual control table where my team was stationed. He gave them a simple hand signal. A second later, the green light on the microphone clicked back on. Julian turned to face the room. The remaining guests immediately quieted down, eager to hear what the groom had to say. "I want to apologize to my parents and our guests for this highly unfortunate display," Julian said, his voice perfectly measured and devoid of any emotion. "Effective immediately, this engagement is permanently canceled. There will be no wedding. My family has spent generations building an honorable reputation in this city. We absolutely will not associate with liars, manipulators, and federal criminals." He looked directly down at Chloe, who was staring up at him with a face completely smeared in black mascara and white frosting. "Do not ever contact me again," Julian told her coldly. He dropped the microphone onto the riser. The loud thud echoed through the speakers, signaling the absolute end of Chloe's privileged life. Julian turned and walked out the grand double doors, following his parents out of the estate without looking back a single time. Julian walked out without looking back a single time. Chloe let out a sound that was less of a cry and more of a wounded animal howl. She scrambled to her feet, her hands slipping on the buttercream, and ran after him. "Julian, wait!" she screamed, her voice cracking. But the heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind him, cutting off her final desperate plea. She collapsed against the wood, sliding down to the floor, an absolute mess of ruined silk and shattered dreams. Marcus was still struggling to pull himself out of the wreckage of the dessert table. He looked absolutely pathetic. The man who had spent his entire life obsessed with looking wealthy and powerful was now covered in white vanilla fondant and sticky pink sugar flowers. Blood trickled down his chin from the split lip Kevin had given him, mixing with the buttercream frosting on his ruined rented tuxedo. He finally managed to get to his knees, slipping on a crushed crystal plate. Kevin had already walked out the side door, leaving his cheating wife on the floor without a single second glance. He was going straight to his lawyer to file for a brutal divorce. Marcus looked up at me, standing on the riser above him. The massive projector screen behind me was still glowing brightly, casting a harsh white light over the entire room. It was still displaying the exact text message where Sarah told him she was waiting in the hotel lobby. "Denise, please." Marcus begged, his voice a pathetic, raspy whine. Turn it off. You proved your point. You ruined me. Just turn the damn screen off, please. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No sadness, no anger, just the cold, sterile satisfaction of excising a tumor. I did not ruin you, Marcus, I said, my voice perfectly clear. You ruined yourself. I just provided the lighting so everyone else could see your handiwork. To my left, Sarah was still lying on the cold marble floor. My security contractors had released her arms, but she did not have the strength to stand up. The silver sequins on her rented gown were ripped along the side seam, exposing the cheap lining underneath. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, and her face was puffy and red from hysterical crying. The remaining wealthy guests, the people she had desperately tried to impress her entire life, were stepping around her as they rushed toward the exit. They looked at her with pure disgust, whispering behind their hands. She was officially a social pariah. She would never set foot in another country club in this city, as long as she lived. I stepped down from the riser, my crimson silk gown gliding silently over the floor. I walked over to the wreckage of the cake where Marcus was kneeling. I held out my hand, and David, my forensic accountant, immediately stepped forward and placed a thick leather-bound folder into my palm. I opened it and pulled out a long, crisp sheet of paper. I dropped the paper directly onto Marcus' chest. It fluttered down and landed on his frosting-covered lap. What is this? He choked out, wiping blood from his mouth. It is your final invoice, I told him, crossing my arms. You wanted to play the billionaire host tonight, Marcus, so you are going to pay the billionaire tab. That is the itemized bill for this entire event. $40,000 for the venue rental, $25,000 for the luxury catering and staff. The invoice details every single bottle of vintage champagne you proudly served to Richard Vance tonight. And an additional $10,000 for the floral arrangements Chloe decided to destroy in my lobby earlier this week. Marcus stared at the bold numbers printed at the bottom of the page, and his eyes widened in sheer terror. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the floor. I do not have this kind of money, Denise, he sobbed, dropping the paper. You know I do not have anything left. You froze every single account. The bank took the house. I cannot pay this. That sounds like a personal problem, Marcus, I replied smoothly, my expression completely indifferent. But since I am the legal owner of this estate and the CEO of the catering company you hired, you now owe my corporation exactly $75,000. The payment is due upon receipt. If you do not pay it by Monday morning, my legal team will file a civil judgment against you. Which means when you finally get out of federal prison, I will be legally entitled to garnish whatever minimum wage paychecks you manage to earn until the day you die. Sarah let out a weak, pathetic sob from the floor. We are going to jail, Marcus, she whimpered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the last guests leaving. We have nothing left. We are going to lose everything. I looked over at her, a sharp, humorless smile touching my lips. You still have each other, Sarah, I said coldly, and you are going to need all the company you can get. I turned my back on them, fully intending to walk out of the ballroom and leave them to wallow in their sugary, pathetic misery. But before I could take more than 3 steps toward the exit, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Rosewood estate suddenly lit up. The dark, manicured gardens outside were instantly bathed in a blinding, rhythmic strobe of flashing red and blue lights. The harsh colors cut through the soft golden glow of the crystal chandeliers, casting eerie, moving shadows across the destroyed engagement cake and the terrified faces of the few remaining socialites. The heavy mahogany front doors, which had just slammed shut behind Julian and his wealthy parents, were violently thrown open again. It was not the catering staff. A squad of local police officers marched into the grand foyer, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. Right behind them, moving with absolute precision and undeniable authority, were 4 agents wearing dark windbreakers. Printed across their backs in bold yellow lettering was the acronym FBI. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern face and a clipped badge on his belt, scanned the ruined ballroom. His eyes bypassed the shocked elite guests and locked directly on to the two miserable figures in the center of the room. He marched straight toward the dessert wreckage, his heavy boots echoing loudly against the marble floor. Marcus Brooks and Sarah Brooks, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming with the weight of the federal government. "Do not move." Marcus scrambled, trying to stand up, but his slick dress shoes found no traction in the buttercream. He fell hard on his knees, holding his frosting-covered hands up in the air. "Officer, there has been a massive mistake," Marcus babbled frantically, spitting out a mouthful of cake. "I am a respected businessman in this city. You cannot just barge into a private $5 million estate. Let me call my attorney right now. I know the mayor." "You do not know anyone who can help you tonight, Mr. Brooks," the agent replied, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "We are executing a federal arrest warrant. You are being charged with multiple counts of federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Because you fraudulently utilized a federally insured banking institution and transferred stolen funds into a shell corporation across state lines, this is no longer a local civil matter. You committed federal offenses." Sarah let out a blood-curdling shriek as two officers approached her. "No!" she screamed, thrashing wildly on the floor. Her ripped silver sequined gown tangled around her legs. "I did not do it. It was his idea." Marcus forged the signature. "I just opened the account. I am a victim of his manipulation. Do not touch me. I am a country club member." A female police officer grabbed Sarah by her wrists, ignoring her hysterical crying, and hauled her roughly to her feet. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the quiet room. Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her face, her carefully constructed high society facade completely obliterated. Meanwhile, the lead FBI agent grabbed Marcus by the collar of his ruined tuxedo and yanked him upright. Marcus groaned as his arms were wrenched behind his back and secured in cold steel. The sticky vanilla fondant and blood from his split lip smeared onto the agent windbreaker, but the man did not even flinch. The elite members of the city who had lingered near the exits now stood in a stunned, silent circle. They had their smartphones out, recording every single second of the humiliating spectacle. They watched in twisted fascination as the man who had just tried to scam them out of $100,000 was read his Miranda rights in the middle of a destroyed dessert table. The agents turned them around and began marching them toward the grand double doors. The perp walk was excruciatingly slow. Every step Marcus took was captured by the flashing cameras of the people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. He was a complete fraud, being dragged out of a mansion he did not own in a rented suit he had just ruined. As the agents hauled him past the riser where I stood flanked by my security team, Marcus completely lost whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left. He dug his heels into the marble floor, fighting against the agent's grip, and looked up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Denise," he screamed, his voice cracking in pure terror. "Denise, please. You have to bail me out. We are still married. You cannot let them put me in a federal penitentiary. Call your lawyers. Write them a check. I am begging you, Denise. I am your husband." I looked down at the pathetic, frosting-covered criminal struggling in federal custody. I slowly crossed my arms, my face completely devoid of any pity or remorse. "My corporate funds are strictly for my business, Marcus," I said, my voice icy and calm, cutting through his frantic screaming. "I do not invest in bad assets, and I certainly do not bail out parasites. Enjoy your new fully funded housing arrangement." The FBI agents gave Marcus a hard shove, forcing him out the grand mahogany doors and into the flashing lights of the waiting squad cars. The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing their fate permanently. I stood in the quiet ballroom, victorious, untouchable, and completely free. I stood in the quiet ballroom, victorious, untouchable, and completely free. But I wanted him to hear me one last time. I walked purposefully toward the grand entrance, stepping out onto the massive stone portico. The flashing red and blue lights painted the manicured hedges in harsh, chaotic strokes. Marcus was actively fighting the federal agents, digging his heels into the gravel driveway and refusing to get into the back of the cruiser. He craned his neck, looking back at me, standing on the elevated steps of my massive estate. He opened his mouth to beg for my money one more time, but I raised my hand and cut him off. "Sorry, Marcus," I called out, my voice piercing effortlessly through the noise of the idling engines and the crackling police radios. "The maid does not have the authority to override the federal government." The lead agent did not give Marcus another second to speak. He pushed a heavy hand firmly against the back of Marcus' head and shoved him directly into the back seat of the squad car, slamming the heavy reinforced door shut. In the cruiser parked directly behind him, Sarah was pressing her tear-stained face against the reinforced glass, wailing uncontrollably as her wrists remained bound in cold steel. The officers climbed into their vehicles, and the entire convoy of flashing lights accelerated down the long, sweeping driveway. I watched the taillights disappear through the massive wrought iron gates, leaving nothing behind but the quiet hum of the night. I turned around and walked back inside the Rosewood estate. The few remaining high society guests were already scrambling toward the side exits. They did not say a single word to me. The arrogant women who had spent all evening gossiping about my catering business now kept their heads down, entirely terrified of making eye contact. They had just witnessed a woman digitally and financially execute her own husband in front of 300 people. They knew I held absolute power. They clutched their expensive purses and hurried out into the night, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the Brooks family. Within 10 minutes, the massive ballroom was entirely empty of guests. The only people left were my loyal corporate staff, my security team, and David, my forensic accountant. Maya walked up to me holding her digital tablet. "The local authorities have officially cleared the premises, Denise," she reported, her voice filled with genuine awe. "The catering staff is ready to begin the breakdown. Have them clean up the ruined cake first," I instructed, pointing toward the collapsed dessert table. "Throw every single piece of that ridiculous fondant into the trash. Tell the cleaning crew to polish the marble floors until they shine. And Maya, tell the accounting department to process full holiday bonuses for everyone working tonight. They earned it." Maya smiled warmly and hurried off to coordinate the staff. I walked over to a pristine silver tray resting on a nearby high-top table. I picked up a delicate crystal flute filled with untouched vintage champagne. I did not stay in the ballroom to watch the cleanup. I turned and walked up the grand, sweeping staircase, trailing my hand along the polished mahogany banister. I walked past the empty luxury suites and stepped directly into the master bedroom, pushing open the heavy glass doors that led out to the private balcony. The cold night air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. I stepped up to the ornate stone railing and looked out over the sprawling $5 million estate that now belonged entirely to me. Below me, my staff was moving efficiently, packing up the remnants of a fake life that Marcus and Sarah had desperately tried to maintain. The silence of the property was absolute perfection. I took a slow sip of the expensive champagne, letting the crisp bubbles burn slightly against my throat. I thought about the last 5 years of my life. I thought about the constant subtle disrespect, the endless financial draining, and the sheer arrogance of a family who believed they had rescued me from the slums. They honestly believed my silence was a sign of weakness. They thought I was a subservient piggy bank willing to fund their delusions just to carry their respected last name. They never realized that true power does not need to scream or brag at a country club. True power is quiet. It is calculating. It tracks every stolen dollar and patiently waits for the absolute perfect moment to strike. I had rebuilt my entire life, cutting out the toxic cancer that had tried to drag me down into federal ruin. I owned my business. I owned this estate. I owned my future. I looked up at the bright stars shining over the city skyline, raising my crystal glass in a silent toast to the incredible peace of a clean slate. Sometimes, to clean up the trash, you do not need to get your hands dirty. You just hand them the shovel and watch them dig their own graves. Denise's meticulously calculated takedown of Marcus and Sarah is a masterclass in the power of financial independence and emotional discipline. The most profound lesson we can extract from this dramatic saga is that true power does not need to scream boast or belittle others to prove its existence. True power is quiet, competent, and deeply rooted in knowing your own worth. Throughout the story, Marcus and Sarah are obsessed with the illusion of status. They rely on rented tuxedos, fake luxury goods, and loud arrogance to demand respect they haven't earned. In stark contrast, Denise possesses actual substance. When faced with ultimate betrayal, both financial and emotional, she doesn't waste her energy on hysterical screaming matches or begging for basic decency. Instead, she leans on her financial independence, gathers indisputable facts, and constructs ironclad boundaries. She understands that you cannot negotiate with toxic people who view your generosity as a weakness to be exploited. While most of us will never have to orchestrate a federal sting operation at a $5 million estate, the underlying principle remains incredibly relevant to everyday life. We all encounter people who try to drain our resources, diminish our accomplishments, or manipulate our kindness to serve their own egos. Denise's journey teaches us that the best defense against this kind of parasitism is self-reliance. When you build your own foundation and maintain control over your resources, nobody can threaten your stability because you built it yourself. You don't have to get your hands dirty fighting toxic people. You just have to stop funding their delusions. Take a hard look at where you are investing your time, energy, and resources today, and immediately cut the cord on any relationship that demands your sacrifice but disrespects your worth.